Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the KidLit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of KidLit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, your KidLit loving host, inviting you back to another bookish conversation with a children's literature author, or two. Because today I'm talking with Chris and J.J. Grabenstein. Chris is the multiple award-winning #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Limoncello, Wonderland, Haunted Mystery, Smartest Kid, and Dog Squad series. JJ, an audiobook narrator, stage actress, and her husband's secret weapon, perhaps, joined him to write Shine, a middle grade novel about finding your place in the universe. They're here today to talk about their newest collaboration together, a new chapter book series called Stinky's Stories, a hilarious, smelly spin on classic fairy tales. There is a lot of fun to be had, I think, today, so let's dive right in. Chris and JJ, welcome to the KidLit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
Well, we love being here on KidLit Love.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. I am fans of you both separately, having read books from both of you, but I'm really excited to be able to talk about this collaboration you have together. Stinky Stories. I did what probably your hope was laugh a lot throughout the two books that I have read and just had a blast, a really, really good time reading.
Oh, good.
Good.
Thank
That's
you.
what we're hoping. These books are geared or aimed towards a younger audience than my Mr. Limoncello books, probably kindergarten through second, third grade. And that's when you're really learning to read. And if you're laughing and having a good time, you'll probably want to keep reading even more.
That's right. So let's start with, even though I don't think we need introductions, let's start with a little bit about both of you separately, and then together of how this collaboration of Stinky's Stories came to be.
Oh, hey, you want to go first, JJ?
Sure. I come from a musical theater background. I've done a lot of traveling with musical theater. And then I met Chris and said, yeah, I kind of want to stay in town. I finally found the right guy to marry. So I stopped touring and started doing more voiceover work. And then Chris started writing children's books, and I got to narrate some of them. And then I started helping him edit and shape the stories. And little by little, it was like, maybe we should actually work on something together. So that's how it happened.
And you had the idea for Shine.
That's true. Shine was my idea. And then Stinky Stories kind of started as an audio. We were joking around making voices for stuffed animals. And we said, this is kind of funny. Maybe we should make a book with this.
Because before I wrote advertising, which was my job before I wrote books, I did improvisational comedy. So now when I go to schools, I always try to work some improv into it. And typically I would talk to kids in their school library, and I'd tell them we could make up a story about anything, like those stuffed animals you have on the bookshelf up there. What do you think they do at night? And with the kids' help, I'd spin this whole story. So I told JJ that story of how I do that. And you told me about your stuffed animal.
Yes, I was big on stuffed animals. I'm big on animals in general, but when I was a little kid, I had like 20 of them all over my bed. And at night, I would pick the one that got the place of honor on my pillow based on what they had done that day. And of course, I gave them all voices, and we had little interactions and stories. So this kind of grew naturally out of that.
And I think the first draft of this, we wrote it as a father or mother reading a story to a kid at night, and the kid didn't like the story and the stuffy on the pillow. But then we said, that's a little bit younger than, let's go to school. Let's go to an elementary school with a story rug where there's a great librarian, Mrs. Emerson, who maybe knows about Stinky's secret powers, but doesn't let on. So we sort of transitioned it. But That's what happens when you work on these things.
Yeah, the secret powers are that Stinky and his friends, the other stuffies, can only speak to the children when there's no adult in the room. But Mrs. Emerson probably knows that's what happens when she leaves.
So that's a little bit how we got to where Stinky is. Yeah. Trying to think about my own story. I moved to New York City to be either a writer or a comedian, and I did improvisational comedy for like 5 years. Bruce Willis was in my troupe, and Robin Williams would stop by whenever he was in town and perform with us. But I did that for like 5 years, and you make like $10 a show. And then every Monday, I'd go back to work at a bank where I was typing. That's how I paid the bills. And I eventually got a job. I auditioned for a job writing advertising through an aptitude test that appeared in the New York Times, written by the creative director of the J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency, whose name was James Patterson. So before he was an author, he wrote commercials, and he was my first boss and hired me. And I did advertising for about 17, 18 years. And then when I got tired of that, I said, that guy James Patterson had a pretty good second career when he quit advertising. I thought there might be a connection between how we wrote advertising to grab people's attention and writing stories that might grab reluctant readers. So my first books were actually adult mysteries. And then I have 24 nieces and nephews who cannot read any of my adult mysteries because they're adult. And they can we read your books, Uncle Chris? No, you can't. When you're 23, 24, maybe. And then one of my books that was rejected by every publisher in New York City, someone else read, said this would be a good book for kids if you got rid of all the adult stuff and cut like 70,000 words out of it, because it was like 110,000 words and it needed to be 40, 45,000. My agent said, do you want to do this? I said, I got 24 nieces and nephews who want to read something.
Yes.
So I rewrote that book completely, and I had so much fun doing it. I don't think I ever looked back.
No,
That was my first one. And JJ did the audiobook for that
that's
one.
right. That's right.
And I believe you won an award doing that audiobook, if I
Oh,
may.
thank you for remembering that.
Oh, the Earphones Award. What was it really called?
Headphone,
Headphones
Yeah.
Award from
earphone, maybe it is earphone. Oh,
Earphones.
it's Audiophile Magazine Award.
Audiophile
I forgot what it's
Magazine.
called.
Audiophiles Earphones Award
Earphones.
for excellence. Back
Okay,
here on the
that's
show.
what it is.
So technically, Stinky's Stories, it is a recent collaboration, but you two have been collaborating in a whole lot of ways behind the scenes, all sorts of books, all sorts of idea generation for a long.
She doesn't have any formal training in editorial, whatever. But I said, could you read this stuff? Like, can you read this? And so she read everything before anybody else. And it turns out she's really a good editor. And she always sits down with a yellow legal pad and a pen. And I'm like waiting, because I mostly write mysteries. Even like Escape from Mr. Lemonshell's Library is a mystery, so you can't really read it. You have to read the whole thing to see if I tricked you and that kind of stuff. She sits there for a week. I'm thinking that's a lot of notes she's taking.
But I think what really helps is that I have a very short attention span. So if I get bored, I just tell him, this part, I kind of wandered off. I wanted to get back to the story. So that's how it started. He said, tell me anything that takes you out of the story. So that's what I
Yeah,
did.
somebody told me that once. Like, that's the best. Because, if you ask people to read your work, for all the authors out there or writers, you don't want them just go, oh, this is great, dude. You're my best friend. So, of course, it's great. It's wonderful. But what do you want them to tell you? Because they're not usually, skilled in how to give critique. So someone told me that's what you need to know is what takes you out of the story. Is it a word you don't understand? It was a thing that was so boring that your mind drifted off and you started thinking about what you're going to have for dinner that night. So whatever takes you out of the story, my job as a writer to get those out of there. So I got to keep you in my story.
Well, you both have done that in these series.
Oh,
great.
thank you.
Stinky's Stories, this series, it is so much fun. I mean, I was having a blast as an adult reader who, remembers the fairy tales that are included in the stories. And I'm raising my hand to join your Stuffy Club because I also had them everywhere. We would play school. I would teach them how to read. We would read together at night. And so this is a book lover's book. It is a librarian lover's book. It's for anyone who loves stories. And I think whether you're a child or an adult, you're just going to have some fun
Oh, well,
reading
thank
this book
you.
and rewriting it.
Thank you for saying One of the things we were hoping is that adults would have fun reading it because there's so many fun, crazy characters, and you can give each of them a funny voice. And we were lucky enough to actually record the audiobook together just recently. And that was really fun, coming up with all the voices for all the crazy characters that we hear in our heads.
She's a professional voiceover performer, and I worked my way through college as a radio personality. I'm told they don't call them disc jockeys anymore because there's no discs involved. So back when I was in radio, there was, and I went on radio commercials. I would sometimes play voices in those, and we've done a couple Audible originals where I had a cameo
That's right.
appearance.
That's right.
So I got to do the goofier voices, like Mr. Stuffington the bear, who's always giving Stinky trouble, or Wags the dog, who's always telling Stinky, yeah, yeah, keep going. Oh, there's a dog in this story. Oh, I like dogs.
Yeah, and I did Stinky, but you gotta buy the book to hear all the great stories I have. And then there's Jerry, the giraffe, who's very confused about everything and doesn't really understand what's going on.
So yeah, but the hard
God.
she's so good when she does like the first chapter before Stinky and the other characters talk. Well, Stinky's narrating, but you got Mrs. Emerson and the kids. She can switch effortlessly between them all, and you can see them all.
Oh, well, thank you. I thought you did a great job.
I had the goofy parts. It's easy to do.
You're a
Oh my gosh, just getting that little clip, those little snippets of those voices. Yours are much better than the ones I was making in my head, so I really, really need to listen now.
That was a lot of fun. We had a that was one of the reasons we really wanted to do this book was that for a chance to do the audiobook. So we've gotten to do two, and there's
Yes.
two more coming next year. What's the
Yeah.
next one called? I always forget the name
The
of it.
three smelly goats gruff and then moldy locks.
Moldy Locks and the Three Bears
Yeah.
is the fourth one. Yes.
Yeah. And we're
Okay.
if kids fall in love with Stinky and they fall in love with the series, they'll want to keep reading the future books too. So we get them hooked on reading and get them hooked on Stinky at the same time.
That's
Hooked on
right.
Stinky reading.
Hooked on Stinky. I like that. That could be a very catchy buzz phrase to go with. So book one, because I don't think we mentioned the actual titles of the book. So I want to make sure I put in the titles of book one and book two. We have The Boy Who Cried Underpants.
Yes.
We have Jack and the Beanstalk. And listeners, I can imagine, can instantly connect to the fairy tale that they represent. But how do you choose, or how did you choose, I should say, which fairy tales you are going to choose to have fun with in this way in this series?
Well, one of the things that we really wanted to talk to kids about is using your imagination to create things. So if they don't like the ending of the story, Stinky helps them write a new ending. So we try to think about fairy tales. What would a kid not be happy with at the end of a fairy tale? For instance, we animal lovers would be a little worried about the sheep at the end of The Boy Who Cries Wolf because they run away. But what happened? Where'd they go? Are they dead? Are they alive? What's happening? So we have a little girl named Abby who's very concerned about the sheep. And that's our jumping off point for that one.
And the same in Jack and the Beanstalk. There's different varieties of it. Sometimes the giant falls to earth and dies. We didn't want to do that one. Other times the giant just falls to earth. But when you think about that story, Jack's a little burglar. I know there's some versions where they say all that stuff the giant had, he stole from Jack's father, but that was like patting it over. He's a little burglar, goes up there, and then he chops down the beanstalk. So the giant's stuck on earth. There's no way for him to get home. So what we also like about these books is the kids are typically very compassionate. Like, that they're kind and they're worried, like, well, what the poor giant, or in the Three Smelly Goats Gruff, the troll gets knocked off his bridge. That, like, the billy goats butt him off. But what happened to the troll? Can he swim? He's in the water. Does he even know how to swim? He's only ever lived under that bridge. Where's he going to go now? So I think that's one of the things I love about it. Is we're trying to find the story, and also if we can work some kind of smell word into the title. That's very important.
That was another thing, yeah.
The Princess and the PU. That's another title we threw around, but I don't think we had enough of a bad ending in that
Not
one.
yet.
Not yet. We'll probably come up with one for that.
Well, that's what I loved as a reader, and even as an adult reader. There are just so many fun, different spins, imaginary twists, putting Stinky into the book, or is Stinky telling the story, and how does that happen? And then just so many fun references that kids like, oh my gosh, there's poop in this book, or there's underwear. We get to say these words. They're terrible, stinky smells. It really is a lot of fun, while at the same time, and this is when I put my educator hat on, I also have a chance to then dive into that fairy tale. And we could pair your book with readings of fairy tales and go deeper and rewrite the stories and look at the versions. And now let's write our own. It's just an opportunity, I think, to not only enjoy the book, but to just dive into this idea of storytelling and imagination and just kind of one domino after the other of how kids, teachers, parents, caregivers, whoever is reading the book can just keep enriching it based on this one thing that is definitely going to have their attention this whole way through.
Oh, great.
Oh,
Yeah, because we tried to go beyond just fairy tales. We got Aesop's fables and
Yeah.
legends and that sort of stuff because they're all story.
yeah.
Excuse me.
So storytelling obviously is a very important theme here, as are libraries and
Yeah.
librarians and the stuffies that sit in there, that we connect to. Have both of you always, well, I know you've been drawn to stories from your introduction, but how important were books to you both growing up and librarians?
I think books were really important to me, though they weren't traditional books because I grew up in an era where in school we had SRA, which were these
Ugh,
color-coded essays. I think they were training us how to take SAT
I
tests.
remember those.
But I fell in love with Mad Magazine at an early age. And I think in Mad Magazine, there was a series every once in a while, like what happened after the prince kissed the princess in Sleeping Beauty, and they would spin some kind of wacky story that would come after. And so I love those imaginary flights. And I've been very fond of libraries. My Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's library book has taken me into a lot of libraries, and it was inspired actually by the new breed of librarians that I discovered when my first book, The Crossroads, the ghost story I was telling you about, when it came out and I started doing school visits and I'd go to libraries because the media specialist or the librarian usually organized an author visit. And I'd start the day in the library. And these kids were coming and going, "Oh, I love this Rick Riordan book." And the librarian go, "Oh, if you like that one, here's another author who you're going to love." And, "Oh, when are we going to do the Lego wall?" It's like, what? When did libraries become fun? Because when I was growing up, a library was the librarian said, "Shh, be quiet, young man. You'll wake up the books, or get your sticky fingers off the books, young man." Like there's all about the books, not the children. But in this new era, or at least new to me, libraries became the center of fun and education in a school. It was also, when you think about it, a kid can do an independent research project, even though they're probably not calling it that. Like if it's a kid like me who liked funny movies, you could probably go to the library and read about the Marx Brothers and Charlie Chaplin. You could do your own independent study. You could put things together. And so I really wanted to celebrate this new kind of librarian with Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's Library and the 6 books of that series. Going to be a 7th one in November. But this, we want to bring that kind of fun now to a younger audience. So even early on, but even though they already know how much fun it is, I love being in the library when the second graders get to come in and pick their book, that they usually parade down the hall. And this is the day we all get to pick our book, and they all pick their book and they know about the scanning and stuff. And then they march out with their books. So it's fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was lucky. I had a very smart librarian when I was a little kid who realized early on that I loved cats. So she handed me a book and said, "I think you're going to like this." And it was about a cat. I was hooked on reading. I went back to that library and got every book about cats that I could find. And that's how I started reading.
Yeah. It just takes one book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally one book can be the thing that unlocks a whole world of stories and imagination and who knows what, depending on the books that you read. I love that. I always tell kids that books are patient and they're just waiting. They're just waiting for you to find the right one. And librarians, educators, adults, this is why I think we all of us big people need to keep reading children's literature, because we can be the one to say to that child, "Well, here, if you read this, you like that, you'll love this." And then it keeps going and going and going. And then they grow up and they write books. Like,
Yeah.
big
There you
deal.
go.
There you go.
I would love to ask you about your process for writing. So I've asked you kind of where the idea came from, but I I don't know if I'd be able to work with my husband all day on a shared project. So I would love to know how does that work, and how do you kind of bat those ideas back and forth and grow it into a book together?
I think it's kind of like when I worked in advertising for 17 years, we were always teams. They would always have a copywriter, me, teamed up with an art director who thought things visually. And so the idea was that neither one of us would be as good as we would be together because he's much more visual, I'm much more verbal. So what we do, and this is what JJ and I do, we would sit down in advertising, put our feet up on the desk. We spent a lot of time looking at the soles of our partners' tennis shoes and just bat ideas back and forth. And you sort of block out, well, what if, yeah, okay, it starts out in the library and then they're reading, yeah, okay. And then you block it out and you block it out and you really make a detailed outline. Then one of us has to sit down. In advertising, I would always go, okay, let me go bang out a script. So I would go to my room for a couple hours and because I could type really fast and I'd take what we had come up with together, turn it into something on paper that then we could react to. And that's kind of how we do this.
Yeah, with Shine, it was definitely exactly like that. But with this book, what we did once he had something on paper, we would do the voices. We
Yeah.
would read it out loud to see if the characters worked, if we liked the characters, if we liked the voices,
Yeah, the last path was the most fun because we read the whole thing out loud.
with all these crazy voices.
Voices. And we said, no, that we don't need this word anymore because you're cutting it back and forth. So there
Right.
was a lot of playfulness involved with that.
Definitely, our cats thought we were crazy. All these
But that's a
voices.
good someone I find when you're working together, like I work with James Patterson, he has the idea and does the whole outline and then sort of passes that to me. Then I do a draft and then you have something to react to. That's you got to get something down on paper first. You got to get something really bad down on paper before you can come up with anything good. So
Right.
someone's got to sit down and I'm the typist.
You're the typist. Yep.
I
he
can do
certainly is.
120 words a minute.
Yep.
So watch out.
So you two just have a lot of fun all day. Voices and writing and
We really do. Yeah. I always say he's like 12 years old, or in this case, 8 years old in his head, but in a good way, in a really good way.
Yeah, we do have a
Right.
lot of fun.
We really do. We're very silly.
Yeah.
that's good though. That's good. And that silliness, that comes through in the books and it just is so fun and lighthearted. And even though listeners can't see, I get to look at the two of you right now because we can see each other live. And in the middle of you, this wonderful puppet that I can't stop looking at, even though I know I should be looking at all three of you. So tell listeners about that so they can imagine it because the book really comes to life in your head. I can't even imagine how much it comes to life in the audiobook. I cannot wait to listen. You have this. So tell them.
Alex Patrick, their
I
illustrator.
think that's his name.
Alex Patrick, I believe that's our illustrator. He's from England. We've never met him. Excuse me. So he drew all the great pictures. That's another great thing about the Stinky books is they're heavily illustrated, usually 1 or 2 pictures per chapter. And somewhere on Instagram or something, I found this company that made puppets, like people like you could get a puppet made of your husband or your wife or your
Your
boss,
dog.
boss at work. You send them a picture and they create a really kind of Jim Henson quality Muppety puppet.
Yeah.
So I sent them one of the drawings of Stinky and I said, could you guys turn this into a puppet? And they did. They did a great job.
Gorgeous.
And he's really flexible. His head turns around and his mouth moves because we thought it's not really practical for both of us to go on as many school visits and in-person appearances. But if we did some little clips of Stinky in front of a green screen and then put him into a library kind of setting, he could show up in the, hey, Chris, do that first line.
Chris, how'd you become an author?
So he can talk to me and, hey, I've got an idea. Let's make up a story together. And so Stinky will be in all my school visits together. And we did a little book trailer with him.
Yeah.
And we might take him to festivals. We're not sure yet. He might get tugged and punched. And you know how kids like to attack a puppet.
Sure do. Sure do.
Might have to get puppet insurance. So yeah, that's Stinky the skunk, and he's got a really good tail. I don't mean the tail's not. They gave him a really good fluffy tail, and he's got a fun expression on his face. He's really cute.
Yeah, he is. Well, and I think it just adds to what your book does for readers, especially young readers. And this is my mom hat on, this is my educator hat on, and just a book lover on. I know that when I work with littler kids, just starting to read, and they get those first chapter books that still has some of those pictures to keep them hooked, but then has a story that is so kid friendly, so relatable, so fun, right? They literally dive into the book and they imagine it. And to be able to see that literally come to life as he does in the book, I can't imagine how much fun those school visits must be, how validating they will be to see the effect that it has on these young readers. Because I used to see it every day. That was the best part of my job, was to be able to see a child read the page and love the page. And these books, 2 right now, 4 later, I
Yeah.
just can't imagine how many kids you're gonna reach.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's good to
That's
hear.
great. Yeah, coming from you, that really means a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
So I want to recap the title so that listeners can keep them in their heads. We've got the first 2 that are already out, The Boy Who Cried Underpants and Jack and the Beanstalk. I have to say, I'm leaning towards that one as my favorite. I really love Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That one too.
we got.
Yeah, we had some.
Love them both, but
Yeah, Jack and the Beanstalk was really fun, especially the audio recording because there's a singing harp and everything. We had so much fun.
and I got to be the giant. Jack was like a little spoiled brat. Yeah.
Those are I was gonna say those are the first 2. Remind me, because I know the next 2 will be coming. So remind me those titles and when, so listeners can.
3
Smelly goat
Scruff,
scruff.
I think in the middle of next year.
Yeah.
And then Moldy Locks and the 3 Bears comes out in I think the fall of 2025.
Okay.
Yeah, Moldy Locks was fun because we sort of turned her into, we think about her, she's a spoiled little brat breaking into people's houses going, I don't like this porridge, I don't like this. And she never says thank you, right? When the bears find her, she just jumps out the window and runs home. And the kids are like, what, she didn't say thank you or sorry, or I'm sorry I ate your porridge and sorry I messed up your beds. She just takes off. So that's why I called her Moldy Locks, because she busts into the wrong house. She goes to the house of the 3 flamingos, and the 3 flamingos give her some kind of, they're magical because flamingos are from Florida, and that's where Walt Disney has the Magic Kingdom. So the flamingos are magical.
Yeah, they have
It's kind of fun logic that we love, just because when you're using your imagination, anything can be true.
anything.
Right.
How come the flamingos can put cast a spell on her? Well, because they come from Florida, home of the Magic Kingdom.
Exactly. So they make her hair moldy. That's why she's Moldy Locks.
I love that. I love that name. I love that name of it. And I love that you just said that about the logic, because that is kid logic. It does all make sense as we read through it.
It does. It's like it's a bit of a Shaggy Dog story, where you add things on, and how we end up with going to, in the Boy Who Cried Wolf turns into the Boy Who Cried Underpants, because there's a guy named Mr. William D. Wolf who's nothing rhymes with the word wolf, so he needs people to shout his name, and so this kid's good. So it's just, I love the goofy logic.
Yeah, it is. And we have Mr. Stuffington, the stuffy bear, who says, what? That can't happen. This doesn't make any sense. And then it's like, yes, it can. It's a story. Anything can happen.
That's right. That's right. And I imagine your books will also spark kids to do a lot of writing themselves, a lot of their own imagining. Is that one of your hopes? Yeah.
They'll
Definitely.
take a story that they've heard and say, well, this doesn't have to be the only ending. This could go in another direction. So hopefully that's what happens.
Yeah, I imagine it will. And I think that is such an important skill for both kids and adults, because if we can imagine a different ending for a story, then we can realize that ourselves, there are all sorts of endings, right? We just get to have fun picking out what they are. So I love the spirit behind it. I love the conceptual idea, but I also love just knowing how many kids are going to be so excited to get these into their hands. I love them. And I can't wait to listen to the audiobook now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're big on imagination. Somebody once said, someone smarter than me, that if you looked around a room, whatever room your listeners are in right now, everything in that room did not exist until somebody imagined that it could.
That's right. That's right. Oh,
it's like the most powerful thing that human beings have. And we're always a little afraid that with our phones and our gadgets and our devices, that the voids that used to be filled with imagination, like when I was a kid, we got bored a lot. Like we would go up, my parents would say, go outside and play. And so you would start making up stories where out in the woods. I grew up in Tennessee, or you might make a story out in the forest where you're out there hunting wild animals and oh, you got caught in the trap. And oh, yeah, whatever the story would be. So hopefully we're encouraging kids to use their imagination.
Yeah. Oh, you definitely are. You encourage this adult to use hers. So that's a mission accomplished.
Excellent.
Where can listeners find both of you online, maybe a website, social media, so they can connect with you?
We have a wonderful website, Chris Grabenstein. How do we spell Grabenstein?
Grab like in boy, Enstein.
I love having. I had to do that for years. Whenever I was on the phone, GRA, B as in boy. That's great. I get to listen to her do it all the time. So chrisgrabenstein.com, and we've got a lot of resources there.
Links to buy the
Links to
books.
buy the
A whole
books.
section about Stinky. You can go, of course, he has 9 million books, but you can click on specifically the Stinky stories.
And we will probably, as time goes on, we add things. So right now we're, I think my web designer is putting up a little behind the scenes of the audiobook. So by the time this podcast comes out, maybe that video should be up. And with time, we're going to add, we notice a lot of libraries do these stuffy sleepovers where kids bring their stuffed animals to the library and they say goodbye. And the librarians take these great pictures of the stuffed animals all watching like a movie, listening to story time underneath little napkins as their sleeping bags. And then when the kids come the next day, they see all these pictures like, wow. And so I'm hoping that, first of all, somebody does a stuffed version of Stinky, and then we can take that stuffed version to help people organize
Stinky sleepovers.
Stinky sleepovers.
That just sounds like the most fun ever. I love it. Well, I have lots of librarian friends that I know would be happy to do a party like that and have a blast with their children. That'll be fun to look forward to.
Excellent.
Well, thank you both. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. I loved chatting with you today.
Well,
Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun. And thanks for all you do to get
Yes,
kids reading.
Thank you.
Because if they don't read, why are we writing? So,
Exactly.
Well, thank you. And listeners, thank you so much for listening to another episode of KidLit Love, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the KidLit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of KidLit Love. Thanks for listening.